Before we begin, folks, I'd like to give an acknowledgement of our traditional lands. So at Royal Roads University, we acknowledge that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees, and the Esquimalt First Nations. And it's with deep gratitude that we live, learn, and work here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, staff, and faculty come together. So grateful that you all could join us here today. And of course, folks, the reason that we're here, we're with Royal Roads University. We're going to be discussing designing for neuro-inclusive learners, adapting course design to support diverse needs. I'm so pleased that I could be joined by my wonderful co-host today, Dr. Elizabeth Childs, who's a professor and the program head for the Mallet program. Nice to see you, Elizabeth.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And then we're also so pleased to be joined by Mary Burgess, who's an associate faculty as well for the Mallet program. So Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to see everybody.
Absolutely. And my name's Ariana Konjerski. I'm an education specialist here in student recruitment at Royal Roads. So as always, delighted to be on the session today. And just a brief agenda here, folks, as we get going. I'll give us just a quick overview of the Royal Roads University experience. We'll talk, of course, about our session today, so designing for neuro-inclusive learners with Mary. And then just a quick program overview of our learning and technology programs and how you can apply, and as well questions throughout the session. And if you're considering Royal Roads, I just want to give us a few brief alumni statistics. So if you're unfamiliar with Royal Roads, or you're just meeting us for the first time, we did a recent alumni survey here with some of our graduates from the university, 93% of whom say that Royal Roads has positively influenced their personal and professional lives. 92% say that they felt supported by staff and faculty. 90% say that we provided them with the tools and knowledge for a leadership role in the workplace. And 89% say that we provided them with the tools and knowledge needed to be innovative in the workplace. So some pretty good statistics there for you. And we're also very proud to be certified as an Ashoka U Changemaker campus. This is an innovative approach to education that prepares students as they address world problems, encourage others, and act for the good of all. And at this point, we will get to the fun part. I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it off to my wonderful co-hosts, Elizabeth and Mary. Take it away.
Super.
Right.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Ariana.
you.
Welcome, everybody. It's so lovely to see some familiar names and faces join and meet some new friends. Thank you very much for taking this time out of your day to come together and talk and learn with us. I am really, you can tell, super excited to have this session. Very excited to have Mary dive in. And when we were talking about this session, we really wanted it to be both process and how to actually do this work, because there's a lot of apprehension to enter into these spaces, and it does take some time to do some good thinking and to do the work. So I'm thrilled to turn it over to Mary. She's gonna take it away, and we'll have lots of time hopefully for questions, because I'll be off the mic, so that'll make sure there's more time. Looking forward to the session. We'll keep the chat up, so if you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to put them in that chat. And Mary, I will turn it over to you and invite you to introduce yourself, maybe to get us started.
I will do so. Hello, everybody. I'm just sharing my screen here. Hang on a second. Let's make sure we got the right one going. Share. There we are. So I am lucky enough to also be on a slightly different part of the territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I live in what's now known as Fairfield, and so I'm really happy to acknowledge that today. I also wanted to do a little bit of a people acknowledgement, especially since it's Indigenous History Month. And I really want to thank and acknowledge the Indigenous women educators that have helped me really decolonize my thinking and lead to work like this that I've been doing, feel more grounded in millennia of resilient practices and ways of knowing and being. And there are many, of course, who I'd like to thank, but in particular, I want to shout out a couple of people who many of you will know. That's Ruth Lyle and Diane Bin, both of you whom have been incredibly generous to me with their time and knowledge, as well as author, speaker, and educator Monique Grace Smith, whose work has really been educational, celebratory, and inspirational to me. So I just wanted to give that acknowledgement for today. Who I am, who am I? So I teach in the Master of Arts in Learning and Technology program at Royal Roads, and I also teach in the Graduate Certificate for Organizational Design and Development. I've worked in teaching and learning in BC post-secondary for, I'm going to say, more than 25 years. And I've actually worked at all three local Victoria institutions and at the provincial level. So I've seen it all, folks. It's been a ride. I now do this teaching work, and I also work as a leadership consultant, and I develop and facilitate leadership workshops that are rooted in inclusion and values. All of my work really focuses on creating human-centered learning experiences and life experiences that support meaningful participation and success for all learners, employees, well, everybody, really. And for the purposes of this talk, it's also important to me that you know that I am a late diagnosed autistic person. Shout out to everybody who found out they were neurodivergent when their children were diagnosed, and it was a huge shock to you. It's been just extremely helpful in understanding some of my past experiences in life, in the workplace, and in academia. So I want to ask you to tell us in the chat what brought you here today. I want to sort of see what is the interest in the room, what's making folks wonder about this sort of this conversation. What's bringing you to the table today? Just in the chat. See some mallet folks in there. That's so awesome. What are you curious about? Why did you come to this session today? Training and want to make sure it will work for everyone. Awesome. Developing a course and prioritizing inclusive design. Awesome. Yes. Hi, Patricia. Learning some new ideas for designing for different students and helping faculty. Yeah, awesome. It's great to see some instructional designers in the room who are already doing a lot of this work, but who really can support faculty with doing that. Oh, nice. People sharing the webinar. Great. Finding out what you don't know. Exactly. And that's really part of it, right? Pivoting your career to learning design as a neurodivergent learner yourself. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, as you say, you don't know until you don't know. And then suddenly you are wondering how come this wasn't knowledge all along and what can you do about it? Yeah, best practices in curriculum and learning design, important Pro D. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for participating in that. Just really important, I think, to kind of think about what you could be learning and why you want to learn it and how you might implement it. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit at first about the lenses that I've used for this work, a little bit of a higher level. And then Elizabeth will tell you about the context of the course within the program. And then I'm going to tell you about what I did in the course, the actual changes, how I made my audit happen, a bit of my own experiences. And then I'm going to give you some things to think about. We can talk together, you can ask questions, etc. A few things about the session. There won't be any breakout rooms or forced participation. If you're more comfortable with your camera off, that's totally cool with me. Make yourself as comfortable as you can to be regulated. I saw a person recently who educates on neurodiversity in the K-12 sector say there is no education without regulation, and that seems pretty true. And I will just also say pets are welcome, and I will like you the most if you have a pet on camera with you. All right, moving along. So I'm working with two frameworks in this audit or lenses that are complementary in this project. The first is Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, which many of you will have heard about and done work in already. The key concept there is really flexibility and the idea that different people's brains work differently. Funny how we're learning that. And I've chosen this graphic in particular because I really want to drive home the idea that these are literal differences in how the brain works. And so that means we have to facilitate learning in different ways. And there are three main principles to UDL. The first is that we want to have multiple means of engagement for our students. So this is the why of learning. These are about networks in the brain that control emotion, motivation, engagement, how we care about and respond to what we're supposed to be learning. So really, I think very much about motivation with this one because of ADHD inattentive type, right? So there are folks who have a really difficult time getting themselves to do something, and they need different ways of motivating themselves. And so thinking that doing things the same way as I always had as an educator, and a student is suddenly going to want to do that, I can't make that assumption. They may not have that type of motivation. They may need me to do something else in order to accommodate that. This means offering choices and reducing threats and distractions, and that will help learners feel safe, invested, and included in their learning. The second principle is when we want to have multiple means of representation. So this is the what of learning. And these networks in the brain help us categorize, gather facts about what we see, hear, and read. In other words, it's about helping us recognize and understand information. So of course, this is about how content is presented. It means providing information in different ways. So I could have written all this out and given it to you to read, or I can do a video, right? There are some different ways that I can use for students to be able to actually take in that learning. And then the third principle is that we want to have multiple means of action and expression. So this is the how of learning. These are networks in the brain that help us plan, organize, and act on information. So this is really executive function and the expression of learning. So it's about how learners show what they know, and so that we can then assess their learning as the educators. It means offering flexible ways for learners to communicate and demonstrate their learning, like writing or a video or a discussion or any other way that they're able to do that. I'm just going to share a resource in the chat here, I hope. Copy link address. And this is from the folks at CAST, and they are sort of the authority on UDL, and it's a great place to go for a lot of good information and the overall model, as well as some very specific information about how to implement UDL. Three things I want to add to this, and the first is that it can be very difficult to implement flexible pedagogy if your learning goals are unclear. You need those goals to ensure that you're providing the right content, the right resources, the right activities to meet the goals. And you need those goals to assess if students are learning what they're supposed to. They need to be specific and measurable.
I'm sorry, Mary, you just are on mute from my end. Sorry,
How
thank you.
about now? Was I on mute for a long time?
No, just a few seconds. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you for letting me know. Odd. Anyways, someone did not want me to say what I was saying. Which thing was it? The third thing is that you might need to help the student get help understanding what they need. So sometimes you can work with them and sometimes they're going to show up knowing, I work best when I do things this way, when I am able to have flexibility around this particular part of the course. Sometimes they're not going to know that. And so having understanding of where they could learn about that is also really helpful for students. Checking that I'm not on mute. No, I'm not. Good. The second lens, of course, that I use to look at at this work is that of neurodiversity. And so again, with this model, it's really an acknowledgement that there are differences in how our brains work. And the research literally shows that there are brain differences that contribute to the experiences and needs of neurodiverse people. I'm just going to nerd out for a second here, but one of the most interesting bits of information to me that has come from research more recently is the process of synaptic pruning that happens in the brain. When people's brains grow, autistic children's brains don't prune as many synapses as neurotypical children's brains do. And so you can begin to understand why they might have more sensory information coming in while they're trying to learn. So if you want to nerd out like I do, brain function is one of my special interests. Also, I want to say about this particular chart and about this in general is that it's important to know, of course, that there are many types of neurodiversity, and that's why UDL and overall flexibility and being clear on learning outcomes and assessment criteria matters so much. And there's still discussion about what will fit under this umbrella, and there will be for quite some time. I also want to say that this chart represents what we tend to think of as the ways in which neurodiversities are disabled by our current culture or systems of education. There are also strengths, for example, an ability to concentrate focus on a given topic in great detail for a long period of time to really produce some very deep learning that can be applied. It could be the ability to be hugely innovative and creative, or it could be the ability to be extremely detail oriented. So this isn't just a where are the problems situation. And I want to tell you that I began this work with a focus on autism, ADHD, and ADHD because that's what I know. That's what I know now. I mentioned earlier being a late diagnosed autistic. What really drove me to start this work was a couple of things. So I had started to be really suspicious of what we traditionally called class participation and its narrow definitions. I'm a real fan of collaboration and collaborative learning, but after many years of advocating for it, I began to see how it disadvantaged learners who didn't have a very particular set of social skills, and how it shamed learners for those whose behaviors didn't align with those very specific expectations and further excluded them. And this could be due to a variety of factors, right? Cultural background is one, neurodivergence is another. Oh, did I lose audio again? No, I'm looking at the thing. Okay, good. That was okay. That was from before. Good. And so then the next thing that happened was that I was attending a Zoom workshop in which participants were put into breakout rooms within 3 minutes of being in the session with no warning and no opportunity to opt out. And I was so dysregulated by that happening that I was not able to transition back into a learning mindset for the conversation with the other participants. And even back in the main session, I ended up leaving after about 30 minutes because I just couldn't stop ruminating about what had happened. So I am the autistic child of an autistic parent. It's now very clear to me that my dad is autistic and has experienced life as a undiagnosed person for his whole life. And I am an autistic parent now who is married to an ADHD parent, and together we're raising an ADHD teenager. And so the way all of those different neurodivergences show up has helped me understand where some of these barriers show up, particularly when it comes to my child who's now 18. So it was a motivation for me, as well as kind of getting deeply understanding what the barriers to education really are for real people in our systems. So now that we acknowledge that there are different brains doing things differently, we of course need to look at our curriculum with a new lens. And I want to say that this isn't about diagnosing problems in learners. It's about noticing when the design puts up barriers. So this guiding question helped me focus the audit on meaningful, human-centered changes. So my question really was, as a person who has been doing instructional design for 25 plus years, does the instructional design of this course disadvantage students with autism, ADHD, and ADHD? And so I'm now going to pass it over to Elizabeth so that we can actually introduce you to this course.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. I won't take long. What I wanted to do is give you a sense of this course in context. And I'll put the link in the chat. You can see all of the courses in the Masters of Learning and Technology program. We operate in the open space, so they're all publicly accessible. All assignments, activities, blogs are all there. This course that Mary dove into is later on in the program, and it's actually a unique course because it's the last one before learners go on to do the beginning of their applied research project or their thesis work, or their consulting project work. So it's the last one where they're doing teamwork together. It's the last one from an instructor standpoint where we have the ability to comment on writing and APA at the graduate level, so they can get feedback and see, okay, I'm on track now, or I'm closer to track, because they're going to move into their research course and then their final project. And so this is that sort of turning point course where they're shifting from the development over time through the program. They're shifting from now moving into that grounding of, okay, I think I'm ready. I've got this, right? That's what we hope. That's what we intend. That's what the design is there for. And when we did the program, we designed programmatically, not just individual courses jumbled together into a bucket, but actually scaffolding the learning throughout the program. And hopefully some alumni can go, oh yeah, I see that now. So this course is interesting because it also is, to be quite frank, it's that last course where learners get some very clear feedback on how are you doing? Are you going to be successful going forward? And so from a program head hat, it's our last opportunity to say, yeeks, let's hang tight here. Let's work before we move into the next lens. From a facilitator's hat, it's a tricky place to be because you're at that pivot point. And we all know that people in graduate programs are amazing humans and they all want A pluses. And sometimes you're not quite there yet. And so it is that tricky point for the instructor to have to really be the one that says, not quite yet, right? So when Mary approached me and said, I'd really like to do this neuroinclusivity audit on this course, I think there's some things we need to change to create a container that actually allows learners to thrive so that we can really get to that point of supporting them to move forward or helping scaffold their learning so that they can then move forward. So I'll stop talking there, but I'll put the links to the course and the program in the chat so you can see them. And Mary, I'll turn it back to you, unless there's something else I should have said I forgot.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping you would talk about. So that's really great. And actually, one thing I want to mention that made this work helpful and that made this work easier to do, and I think will be helpful for you, is that the program also has embraced open education. And so all of the assignment descriptions are available to look at on a WordPress site that is open to the world. So I'm going to be able to also show you the actual assignment description for this. So let's see here. Back to me. So the course is LRNT 528, Facilitating in Digital Learning Environments. It's a master's graduate level course in the MALT program. And the assignment that really drew me to do this work is assignment 2, which is design and facilitate a learning experience. And if you've done the ISW or the ISWO, you may have a ring of familiarity here. And if you want to talk more about how this all came to be at some point, I'm happy to do that too. So the student teams are already created when the course starts. And basically the teams are required to do a 1-week facilitated learning experience for their peers. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is the learning outcomes for the course. Sorry, these are course learning outcomes that are assessed through this assignment. And I'm going to give you the link to the assignment also here. Oh, you already put it there. Thank you. So let's talk about these learning outcomes. So the first one, demonstrate appropriate use of student-centered facilitation strategies. So they need to make choices, just like I do, about the techniques they're going to use to help their participants learn. And they will be assessed on those choices, obviously. They need to design a digital learning experience on a contemporary issue. So this one is really about making a plan. They submit the plan to me prior to their facilitation week. I give them feedback, they finalize it. The plan starts with what needs to be a solid learning outcome and includes what resources, technologies, techniques they will use. Again, facilitate a digital learning experience on a contemporary issue. So topics have been things like AI, open education, indigenization. This outcome is about how they facilitate. So they are required to facilitate both asynchronously and synchronously, and they're assessed on the choices they make about how to facilitate learning via their chosen techniques. Then finally, they evaluate a facilitated digital learning experience. They also each evaluate each other's facilitation week as part of the assignment, so everybody gets a solid set of feedback from a variety of perspectives once they've done their week. So how did I actually do this audit? I did a bunch of looking at, I'm just gonna it was like a very flowy process. So I did a bunch of looking at criteria I could use for auditing the assignment against neuroinclusive outcomes and standards. So back in, I don't know, December, I had done some work on the other course that I teach to create assessment criteria. And I had been very successful at using AI to do that work. So I had a little bit of a head start using AI to figure this kind of thing out. I had at that time spent time trying out different tools to see which one worked best, looking into the ethics of various tools, seeing what had the best outputs, what was the most intuitive to me. So I had a little bit of a, head start on working on tools like this. So once I had those outcomes and standards, thanks to the AI, I was then able to assess them based on my experience to make sure that I wasn't being fed a bunch of lies by AI. And I'm qualifying that in that way because obviously it's so important to critically evaluate what you get back from AI across a variety of measures. And I think that is critical. And also, I want to say that's information literacy, and it applies to everything you look at on the internet, not just AI. So then I ultimately came up with a solid list of audit criteria with clear descriptions. And I'm going to share that in a moment. Once I had those criteria, I fed the AI the original assignment and asked it to audit and make suggestions based on those criteria. Again, reviewed the results, compared the two versions of the assignment side by side with the assessment criteria for the actual assignment to ensure that everything was still getting covered and that I was comfortable with those results. Finally, I asked the AI to create additional resources for me, like a template for the facilitation week plan, example plan submissions, a planning document for the assignment overall, and support also for teamwork, like the possible roles that could be active on a team and specific suggestions for what each role would do. So you can see that what I'm building here is more clarity about what is expected. Again, I had the AI create those things for me, and then I went in and modified them to ensure that it was what I actually needed. And of course, along the way, I met with Elizabeth to make sure I wasn't going wildly off track, and also with Julia, who is one of the amazing team coaches at Royal Roads, to get some help with supporting the teamwork aspect, like those roles I just referred to. And both of them provided really helpful insight to me so I could focus the work, because there were times where I was going in and then way out and having to go, no, 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 that's not what we're working on right now, and get back to it. And I needed sort of the reality check occasionally. So here is the audit criteria, some of it. I didn't want to put it all in here because it's massive. And I'm going to put in a link to the document that I created and sent to Elizabeth when I had done a lot of this. I hadn't done any of the work, but I had run it through the audit. So you can kind of have a look at how I formatted and thought about the work as I did it. So what you see on the screen are some of the criteria that I actually used. What I actually want you to notice about the descriptions and imagine how they might play out in reality, because you can see that some of them are about what I can provide, but some of them are also about how the students will interact with each other. And it's up to me to find ways to facilitate that, but it's up to the students to actually do it. So some of this is about culture and building a culture that supports this inclusion. Both of those aspects are really important here. So key findings in the actual audit. These are things that you will find in every single course. As an instructional designer who's worked on a lot of courses, these are things that are in every single course, right? So for example, the assignment instructions, complex and dispersed, increases cognitive load, makes it difficult for students to get to what they actually need to see to do the assignment, right? The participation and collaboration expectations, the audit thought that those were quite socially demanding and underspecified. So this is a really crucial one. Remember, I talked about my experience in that webinar. It would have been really easy for the other people in the breakout room that I was in to think I didn't care, couldn't be bothered to talk to them. And that wasn't what was happening. So setting up all students for success like this is really crucial for inclusion. Social expectations cannot be vague. They're not universal across cultures and abilities. So we want to be really clear about that. The second or the third piece is that the real-time activities had multiple technology options that could overwhelm students and lead to decision fatigue. Choice is a really good thing, and we want to be flexible with choice, but it needs to be used judiciously and with intent. Otherwise, it can overwhelm. The participation grading lacked some flexibility and could disadvantage neurodivergent communication styles. So I want to say that my preference for texting isn't morally inferior to yours for making a phone call. And again, this is a culture piece and an acknowledgement of people as they are, not as our social systems have dictated they should be. Access needs, finally, this one is about accessibility. If that notion is not proactively affirmed in the course structure or in the culture, it is so important for students to be able to feel safe to come and say, this is what I need. These are the learning needs that I have. Can you accommodate this? And so you want to create a space where they feel safe doing that and where they feel safe contributing more fully as themselves. So once I had all of those findings, I then asked the AI to make very specific suggestions about how to improve the assignment and other aspects of the course. And I'm now working on implementing those changes in time for the August start date of the course. I want to tell you about the big challenges in doing this work. And of course, the first one is there is no enough. How much is enough? I could change everything in this course if I had the time and inclination, but I have other things to do. And I don't know if anybody else has heard of GALMO. It's one of my favorites. It stands for good enough for now, let's move on. And sometimes you really have to think that way. You cannot just stick on one thing and continue to try to keep gold plating it. You've got to just decide this is what I'm going to go with for now. And of course, I ended up doing more than I planned, just like most people would. Once I did one thing, other things I thought didn't look so good. So I wanted to fix those too. That said, it's really important that educators not look at this and be overwhelmed and think, I can't do this. You can do very small things and make a difference. Choose a UDL principle and work with it. Make one assignment description easier to read, right? Like there are baby steps here. The second big issue that I was concerned about all the way through was whether or not what I was doing was reducing academic rigor. Is this academically sound now that I'm providing a template for the facilitation week, for example? And I repeatedly went back to the assessment criteria and learning outcomes to manage that tension. Balancing inclusion with academic expectations is really complex, especially in a colonial system that we're trying to decolonize and that has been built by privileged people for themselves. Um, Working in a system designed for sameness is challenging, right? And so I think it's really important to recognize that. And you know that there are many people here who, like me, have been trying to challenge and change things. And it's wearing, just the understatement of the year. But that said, I had to keep asking whether these changes I was making upheld academic integrity, not as gatekeeping, but as meaningful learning and as the reality of the situation that students are in. Elizabeth talked about this being the last course in the program. They need to have certain skills before they get out of this course to be successful. So I need to make sure that happens. And so I have to be very careful about aligning what I'm doing and what I'm expecting of students with those learning outcomes and assessment criteria. Yeah, and also again, that acknowledgement that there are some norms that reflect a narrow definition of success, but you have to balance that with academic standards so that students can be successful in the program that they're in. I am confident that rigor is not reduced in this course, having been obsessed with that, but it is definitely something to be thinking about, and I know it's something that folks are concerned about. So we now have a bit of time to discuss where you might go next, ask questions. That was a pretty high level and fast overview of what has been a pretty detailed process. But I welcome anybody to ask any questions or make a comment or anything like that. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you.
Yes, that is a great question. What else would you want to answer that question, Elizabeth?
I haven't even read it yet, so you
Oh,
go
yeah,
first.
yeah. No, it's basically like what's the most bang for your buck kind of question, right?
Yep.
And so I think you can start with something like one of the other things I'm going to be doing in this course is changing the way that the readings are laid out. So right now there's a link to the reading, the APA citation, and a little synopsis with some things to think about. I'm going to be adding a piece that says, here's about how long this is going to take you to read, shortening the synopsis and putting them into a format that every reading will be in. And again, I'm using AI to do that. I plug in the APA citation, it gives me the synopsis, the whole thing lined up, and then I can plug that into my course. So those kinds of things I think are one of the quicker ways to do it because you're not having to then think about, is it okay to change this assignment to have a more flexible option for what they actually hand in? That takes a bit more complexity and thinking than to change the way something is presented to students. What would I have done differently if I'd been able to design this course from its inception? Well, the thing is, I was kind of part of that because, as I said, this course comes from, if you've done the instructional skills workshop, which is a common workshop done by educators across Canada since the 70s, one of the parts of that workshop is that you design a learning experience for the other folks in the workshop. So that was a face-to-face workshop that then became an online workshop called the Instructional Skills Workshop Online, that then became, I can't remember what, facilitating learning online. So it's a course that has traditionally been done in all of these different ways to, at different formats to encourage that applied action of facilitating learning for somebody. Thank you for posting that link. Facilitating learning for people and thinking about that in very specific and intentional ways. And so all that to say, if I were designing the course today, yes, I would do it differently than it was originally designed. If I had no knowledge of what I have now around neurodiversity, I would probably have designed it very similarly to the way that it was originally designed. It was the when I taught it last year for the first time, I was super lucky to have had a colleague worked together for years. Many of you will know Clint Lalonde, who taught this course and gave me just a whack of resources to help me teach the course, scripts and things like that. And so having that allowed me to just run the course and see how it went and identify where students were struggling and where I thought that things could be done differently to make it easier for students. So I guess all that to say, I would probably design it the same if I was the one doing it from the start. But if I was designing it today, then I would prioritize a lot of these things that when you do them in the course of designing the course, you're not going back and retrofitting later, which is what we want to be doing in things like UDL and inclusion, right? We want to start with those principles in mind, but we learn and things change. And so sometimes you got to go back and fix what you did. Other questions or comments?
Just while folks are typing, Mary. So a couple of, well, one thing I think that there's a lot that stood out for me. But your comment about social expectations cannot be vague. And I think we all sort of know that when you hear it. But then when you think about how you create things in your course, especially in that flat environment, right, of an online setting where it really is word related, right? The creative art is actually the writing,
Yeah.
and everyone brings their own style to that. And so I'm wondering, as you went through the rubric and looked with that intent around, okay, what can we do with these? Have you done this where you've actually bounced it off some people as opposed to just using a checklist to kind of see where the gaps are?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And in different ways through the years, right? In terms of doing workshops like this or designing actual instruction. I think one of the things that I will do, though, I don't think, one of the things I plan to do with the students in the course is to be very explicit with them about the fact that I've made these changes, partly because I want to model that to future educators or current educators, but also because I want to know what they think. And I want to know if the things help or if they made it more challenging, right? And so I think one of the ways that I've done that in the past and will do going forward is to say, I did these changes specifically so that it would be XYZ, and I would love information about how to make that work. So yeah, it's the very much the action research approach to making changes in all kinds of learning facilitation, right? Is try it, look at the evidence of what other people are doing, see what might work with your stuff, and then try something and ask your participants how it went.
And I'm buying all of you time as you type in the chat. It's but my other curiosity is you worked with AI extensively as you went through these revisions.
Yeah.
You also have quite a depth of knowledge around autism, ADHD. You've got a critical mass to be able to really um, critically assess the output from AI and adjust accordingly.
Yeah.
What do you recommend for instructors who may not have that knowledge base yet, but really want to be able to tap into some of the affordances of AI? Where are there resources you would point them to, websites? How can they be that critical consumer?
Yeah, I mean, one of the resources I would recommend to them is the Center for Teaching and Educational Technology at Royal Roads, who have a myriad of experience and resources about using AI in education, both this practical pieces of it and the ethical pieces of it. And there's a lot of thinking around that right now, obviously, right? And so I think that's what, so in terms of resources, go to your teaching and learning center. And if you don't have access to a teaching and learning center, Google a teaching learning center at any big university across Canada, because they all have resources about this, and some of them are incredibly helpful. I will say that one of the other resources that I was lucky enough to get is that last year when this course ran, several of the student teams in their facilitation week did stuff about AI. Well, I learned a ton from them in doing that, right? Because they were looking at ethical issues. They were looking at which of the tools is best for this particular activity, all of the various aspects of AI as it relates to education. So I was able to get that learning from students as well as see it in their eyes, right? And it was really fascinating because at the time that I was teaching this course, there was also a big discussion happening in our field around using AI, and quite a lot of gnashing of teeth and conflict. And so I was having the students do their presentations about it, and the critical views that they brought with it, and yet the optimism was really helpful for me to think about using AI in a different way than if I had just been involved in that conflictual conversation, right? So I think we want to um, make all kinds of options and look at them critically for our context, and talk to other people about what they're using. Yeah.
Awesome.
Did,
Thanks. I
did
see a
I,
question from Darren in the
yeah,
chat.
I'm just looking at, did I have any issues with AI confabulating content that wasn't in the articles you fed it? No, I didn't. Occasionally I've had, if I ask for a synopsis, um, it'll give me stuff that wasn't necessarily in that article. And so it's not, yeah, I would say you have to look at it with a critical lens. So it wasn't so much that it wasn't in the article, it was kind of like assumptions were being made because it's pulling information from a variety of sources, right? So as a subject matter expert on that piece, I have to look at it and say, like, it's not doing the work for me. It's organizing it faster. It's pulling it together faster. It's collating it faster. It's facilitating my work faster. Um, Recent theses on AI. Awesome. Yes, that's great. So, and I was going to say, so what tool did I use? So actually for the work that I did on this course, I used ChatGPT exclusively, because when I did the work on the other course, I tried out 3 different tools and I just found that ChatGPT was the one that worked the best for what I was doing, that had the right number of steps for me, the right level of information, the right access to information, whereas some of the other ones really wanted to put me into like sort of a templated experience of building an assessment criteria of something or something like that, that might be good if I was a beginner and just learning how to do it, but I didn't want to go through their prescribed steps. So ChatGPT is the one that I use the most for my work. We have had some interesting conversations about using AI at Royal Roads. And actually, I think the policy around using AI at Royal Roads is one of the most progressive I've seen, and one of the most, I would say, realistic about the ways in which AI is being used in the workplace. So when I had a student ask me a question specifically about using AI for an assignment last semester, not in this course, but in the other course that I taught, my opinion is that you can use AI in the same way that you might ask your brother to read your paper and say, does this sound stupid? But you can't use it because you can't use it to generate ideas, because I have to be able to assess you on whether or not you can generate those ideas. So it's not a hard no from me, but it definitely has some barriers and boundaries that students need to stay in, that once you're in the workplace, as I am, so I can be afforded all of those opportunities. then I'm able to give students, then I'm able to actually assess whether students are doing the learning or whether or not they're not and just using AI. So it's a conversation, I think. And I'm lucky enough to be working with graduate students who are adults, who are educators, who are value holders. And I think it's a very different situation if I'm teaching English 100. I'm very glad I'm not. That's great. Some awesome articles there. Thank you, Elizabeth. Any other questions or comments? If you're interested in talking more or working with me on something like this, I'm easy to find at mburgess@royalroads.ca. I got a good early email address in 2002 and I never let it go.
Awesome. Just while people are thinking if they have any last minute questions, I'm going to drop, so I put a bunch of links in the chat there you may or may not find useful. And I'm just going to pick up on one of Mary's points around, that using AI and how students might use it in different perspectives. Well, I know that's not the focus of this. I can see, and there is quite a bit of value in, which is why I put the link to Aiden Cinnamon Tea, which is a differently
Oh, it's so
construed
awesome.
language model, a large language model. And so you can see how you could put, starting to be able to put content or ask content back and forth within different large language models that have a completely different value and belief set that's informed them. And that alone prompts and opens up the conversation for, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, I wonder what's missing. That's
Mhm.
interesting. That's a great perspective. And it pushes you to then think a little bit further and a little bit perhaps more deeply about some interconnections. The last link I'll put in here, just to help balance out the whole thing, comes to me from the Masters of Arts students in their Climate Action Leadership program. They're doing their seminar this afternoon, and I was doing my pre-reading. And this is a really interesting one around, I think it is going to work, hopefully. If not, I'll fix it. But it's around limits to AI growth from complex systems analysis across 4 lenses. So those of you who are familiar with Senge's work and the Wayback Time and the Wayback Machine, all of that complex systems sort of starting, you'll see some of it reflected here. It is a bit of a dense read, I will warn you. It does get a little mathematical, but at the same time, it I think offers a nice sort of balanced perspective around where we are in this current state right now and things for educators and others to consider. So it's a bit of a tangent from what we've been talking, but I wanted to round it out.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just typing a response to Patricia here
Perfect. Okay.
about who I worked with at Camosun, and it's totally awesome. And it's really about offering choice, right? And I think in my case, I don't mean this to sound any way derogative, but when my child was 3, I didn't say, "What do you want to wear?" I said, "Do you want to wear this, this, or this?" And I would say the same in defining choices for students in your assignment. Don't say, "Give it to me in whatever format you want to give it to me." Say, you can do a video, you can do a presentation, or you can write a paper.
We have that right now where we have them make an infographic. Some people don't actually want to make an infographic, and the leveling
Exactly.
up to make an infographic is really not where they want to spend their mental
Yeah.
energy, but they would
Yeah.
happily make a old, what some people would call the old school poster board,
Yeah.
hand drawn, handwritten, that represents their learning.
Yeah. Exactly. And I can assess whether or not they learned about the community of inquiry model from that poster board. Like, that's what I'm looking at, not looking at what color pen did you use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but that's your last call to get them in there. Mary, I'm going to give a big thank you. We'll do a proper thank you at the end, but I will turn it back to Ariana because I know she has a few other words of wisdom she'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but I will tell people about the programs, which are wise. So I guess that applies. Let me just share my screen again. just while I'm putting that up there, just a big thank you to Mary. That was so wonderful to just sit and listen to. So very grateful for your time. If you are thinking about applying to the learning and technology programs at Royal Roads, I'll just give us a few things to think about. So if you're looking at these programs either now or in the future, just some things to consider. So at Royal Roads, to apply, there is an online application fee. So that's $136.69. And then we ask for some supporting documents. So thinking about things like official transcripts, if you have prior post-secondary, a detailed resume, personal statement, letters of reference, and there are some English language requirements as well. A personal statement, just to highlight that, I always describe it a little bit as if you were applying to a job. It's a bit like your cover letter. So kind of detailing what do you want to get out of the program? What are you bringing to the program? Why is it relevant to you? How does it speak to you? There's full details on how to do this at royalroads.ca, but just some things to think about. We also have some key dates. So for our MA and graduate diploma in learning and technology, the next start date is March 23rd, 2026. And then the application deadline, December 23rd, 2025, which seems far away. However, before we know it, it will be December 23rd, 2025. So if you are thinking about it, there's no time like the present to apply. So just some key dates to keep in mind. And then we have some services that are available to you at Royal Road. So in terms of financial aid and award services, there are things like loans, bursaries, scholarships, research scholarships, emergency funding, all types of things that are available. And we also have our wonderful folks in enrollment services. So if you are looking to get a hold of somebody who you can chat with, you can reach them at learn.more@royalroads.ca. There's also some phone numbers for local and for toll free. They really help you narrow down your program options. They can connect you with students and alumni, program heads, all sorts of fun stuff. So if you are looking at these programs or thinking of applying, please do be in touch. I will also send all these resources from the chat into our follow-up along with the recording as well. Been taking note of those. And with that, that's all for me. So I just want to say a very big thank you to Mary and Elizabeth. Such a wonderful session here today. I'll just offer you, Mary and Elizabeth, the floor one more time if there's any last words you want to say before we wrap up today.
Just thank you. Thanks for coming and listening to me talk about one of my special interests.
It's amazing. Thank
Mary,
you.
thank you so much for both doing the work, doing the big thinking behind the work, and for sharing it with everyone. All of you who joined in and those that are viewing the recording afterwards, thanks for making time for this. You have lots of choices of what you do in your day. I know, now I sound like an airline, right? And we're really pleased that you came to spend some time with us, but we are, because this is where thoughts get shared, ideas get sparked, and amazing things can happen. So thanks for making the time and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next time.